Chapter 1. The bathhouse incident. Rain had a way of softening the edges of things, the hedgerows, the gravel paths, even the towering silhouette of Hawthorne Hall, its grey stone glistening under the pale morning light. The air was thick with mist and the scent of wet earth. Somewhere beyond the gardens, the clock tower tolled 6, and with that solemn sound, Clara Whitmore's new life began. Her hands trembled as she stepped down from the carriage, boots sinking into the gravel. The wind tugged at her bonnet ribbons and chilled her through the thin wool of her borrowed cloak. Before her rose the estate, vast, cold, magnificent, its arched windows staring down like judging eyes. She clutched the single satchel that held all she owned, 2 plain gowns, a hairbrush with missing bristles, and a worn locket containing a miniature portrait of her mother. She was a maid now, a servant. Not long ago she had been Miss Clara Whitmore of Briarfield House, a lady with suitors and Sundays in the drawing room. But ruin had come swiftly. Her father's gambling debts, her mother's decline, the auctioning of their home. The genteel world had turned its face away. And so, when the position at Hawthorne Hall was offered, by the mercy of an old family acquaintance, she accepted it with trembling hands and a silent prayer. Inside, the house was hushed, except for the distant crackle of the hearth. The vast entryway smelled faintly of beeswax and lavender polish. Portraits of stern ancestors lined the walls, dukes, duchesses, and soldiers in gilt frames, their eyes seeming to follow her as she crossed the threshold. A woman in a black dress and a crisp white apron stood waiting, Mrs. Blackwell, the housekeeper. Her posture was as rigid as the clock on the wall. "Miss Whitmore," she said, her tone neither kind nor cruel, "you are to be addressed as Clara here. His Grace does not tolerate airs among the staff. You'll keep your head down and your hands busy, and we shall get along just fine." "Yes, ma'am," Clara murmured. Mrs. Blackwell studied her for a moment, as if reading the ghost of gentility in her every movement. "You'll report to the East Wing. There's linen to press and rooms to prepare before breakfast. And mind you, the Duke keeps irregular hours. You are not to enter the West Corridor without permission. His Grace values his privacy above all." Clara curtsied, trying to still her shaking hands. "I understand." But she did not understand. Not yet. The servants' corridors twisted like a labyrinth beneath the grand halls above. Narrow passages lit by flickering sconces, the air warm with the smell of bread rising in the kitchen ovens. Clara's fellow maids moved swiftly, speaking in the clipped rhythm of routine. She followed the lead of Elsie, a round-faced girl with cheerful eyes and a ready smile. "Don't fret," Elsie whispered as they polished silver together. "First days are always dreadful. The Duke's a strange one, but fair. Keeps to himself mostly, except when he's brooding by the fire like some tragic novel hero." Clara allowed herself a small smile. "And what is he brooding about?" "Oh, love, no one dares ask. Some say he lost a sweetheart years ago. Others say it was his brother in the war. But truth is, no one really knows. He's a mystery, wrapped in velvet and command." The words lingered. A mystery, wrapped in velvet and command. By the time dawn burned off the mist, the house was alive with the quiet bustle of preparation. Footmen polished brass sconces. The cook shouted orders through the warmth of the kitchen, and Clara, weary from nerves and scrubbing, was sent upstairs with a bundle of fresh towels and soap, instructed to leave them by the marble bath in the west corridor. She hesitated at the foot of the grand staircase. The west corridor, the one Mrs. Blackwell had told her to avoid, but the message had been clear. The Duke had requested these items personally. To disobey would be worse than to comply. Heart pounding, she climbed the stairs. The air grew cooler, the silence heavier. Paintings gave way to tall doors and draped windows overlooking the gardens below. She moved softly, her shoes whispering against the carpet. At the end of the hall, she found it. A carved oak door slightly ajar. Steam drifted through the gap, carrying the scent of cedar and soap. She knocked gently. No answer. "Begging pardon," she said under her breath. "I was told to leave the linens." She stepped inside. The room was filled with mist and the quiet ripple of water. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, cutting through the steam in golden ribbons. The marble floor gleamed, and in the center stood a great copper bath, its edges polished to a mirror shine. Clara's breath caught. She had never seen such a room, luxurious and intimate, with carved screens and velvet robes draped over a chair. She moved quietly to the side, meaning only to place the towels on a nearby stand. Then she froze. The water moved, and from its depths, a man's voice, low, firm, unmistakably alive, spoke. "Who are you?" Clara spun around. There, half shrouded by steam, sat Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne, the Duke himself, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and very much unclothed, though the water mercifully concealed most of him. His gaze was sharp as cut glass, his expression a mix of surprise and growing irritation. I'm so sorry, Your Grace," Clara stammered, her face burning. "I was told to deliver these linens. I knocked. I thought, clearly you did not think enough." His voice was deep, the kind that left no room for argument. She dropped the towels in a clumsy heap and turned to flee, but her shoe caught on the rug. With a strangled gasp, she stumbled straight against the edge of the bath. The copper rang under the impact. Water sloshed, splattering across the marble floor and over her apron. Nathaniel rose partly from the water, instinctively reaching out to steady her. His hand caught her wrist. The touch seared through her like fire. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Her eyes met his, blue-gray, unreadable, intense. Drops of water clung to his dark hair, sliding down his temple. She could hear the quickened sound of her own breathing, the faint crackle of the fire behind him. Then he released her, slowly, as if breaking some spell. "Get out," he said quietly, not in anger, but something rougher. Confusion, perhaps. Clara fled, her skirts trailing wet footprints behind her. Down in the servants' quarters, she scrubbed her hands until they trembled. Her reflection in the basin showed a girl, pale with mortification. She had lasted less than one morning and already humiliated herself before her employer, the Duke no less. Elsie burst in a moment later, wide-eyed. "Clara! The Duke himself sent word. Mrs. Blackwell wants you in her office now." Clara's stomach turned to lead. The housekeeper's office smelled of starch and ink. Mrs. Blackwell sat behind her desk, spectacles perched on her nose. "Explain," she said without preamble. It was a misunderstanding, ma'am. I was told to deliver linens to the west corridor. I didn't know His Grace was bathing?" The housekeeper's brow rose. "Indeed." She tapped her pen against a ledger. "The Duke is not a man to suffer interruptions lightly." Clara swallowed hard. "I beg forgiveness. It won't happen again." For a long moment, Mrs. Blackwell said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, she sighed. "His Grace has instructed me not to dismiss you." Clara blinked. He hasn't. No, though I suspect it's not mercy but curiosity that stays his hand. You are to remain at your duties, quietly, discreetly, and I advise you to keep well clear of the west corridor henceforth. Yes, ma'am, but Clara's relief was tainted with something else. Confusion. Why would a man so proud, so private, spare her? That evening the household gathered for supper in the servants' hall. The long table buzzed with chatter, the clatter of cutlery, the hum of gossip. Clara tried to eat, but her stomach was knotted tight. She could feel glances darting her way, whispers spreading faster than wildfire. "That's the one," she overheard a footman murmur. "Walked straight in on him, they say. Bold as brass." Elsie nudged her gently. "Don't mind them. Servants will talk, and they'll tire of it soon enough." Clara nodded, though her cheeks burned. She kept her eyes fixed on her plate, pretending not to notice the curious stares. But far above them, in his candle-lit study, the Duke was thinking of her. Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne, Duke of Ravenscar, sat by the fire, a book open but unread on his knee. The events of the morning replayed in his mind like a scene he could not banish. He had expected fear, a flurry of apologies and tears. Instead, the maid had looked at him with something startlingly direct in her eyes. Shock, yes, but also dignity, pride. He had spent years surrounded by people who bowed and simpered. He had not expected defiance from a servant. He ran a hand through his damp hair and exhaled slowly. Ever since his brother's death in the Peninsular War, he had lived half in shadow, avoiding society, avoiding emotion, avoiding the unpredictable. Yet one slip of a girl had disrupted that peace within seconds. He ought to have dismissed her. That would have been simple, clean, proper. And yet, when she had stumbled, her hand brushing his, he had felt absurdly alive. He closed the book with a snap. "Foolishness," he muttered. "She's a servant, nothing more." But even as he said it, his mind betrayed him. Remembering the trembling curve of her mouth as she apologized, the wild pulse of embarrassment, and something else in her eyes. The next morning, Clara was assigned to the library, dusting the endless rows of books that lined the shelves. It was quiet there, safe. Or so she thought. Sunlight streamed through high windows, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. She moved methodically, lost in thought. Then behind her, a low voice broke the silence. "You work early, Miss Whitmore." Her hand jerked. A feather duster slipped from her fingers. She turned, and there he was, framed by the light, the Duke. He wore no cravat, his shirt open at the throat, sleeves rolled to his forearms. Casual, but no less imposing. His expression was unreadable. "Your Grace," she said quickly, curtsying. "Forgive me, I didn't hear you enter." "I prefer quiet," he said. "You needn't apologize." He studied her for a moment, then crossed to the shelves. "You read?" Clara blinked. "A little, sir. Not common among the staff. My father believed an educated mind could not be taken from you," she said softly, before realizing she had spoken too freely. Something flickered in his gaze. Interest, perhaps. "Your father was a scholar." "No, sir. A gambler." A pause. Then, surprisingly, the Duke smiled, faintly, wryly. "A tragic breed." Clara's lips curved despite herself. "Indeed." For a moment, the air between them softened. Then he straightened, the flicker of warmth vanishing behind his usual composure. "Continue your work, Miss Whitmore." He left as quietly as he had come, leaving the faint scent of sandalwood and soap in his wake. Clara's heart pounded. The world, she realized, had shifted again, not through scandal or fortune, but through a single look exchanged in a room full of books. And though she did not yet know it, the moment she had walked into his bath by mistake had changed everything for both of them. Chapter 2. The Duke's temper, the maid's pride. The rain had ceased by morning, leaving the world washed clean and shimmering. Hawthorne Hall glittered beneath the weak spring sun, its tall windows gleaming like eyes newly opened. In the gardens, dew clung to every blade of grass, and the scent of roses drifted faintly through the air. But inside the grand house, not all was peace. A tension hummed quietly in the corridors, a ripple of whispers that seemed to follow Clara Whitmore wherever she went. The staff spoke in lowered tones, their glances darting toward her when they thought she would not notice. That incident, had not been forgotten. "Did you hear?" hissed one scullery maid as Clara passed the laundry room. "They say she saw everything." "Hush," another warned, eyes wide. "You'll get dismissed for talk like that." Mrs. Blackwell's got ears everywhere. Clara kept her head down, pretending deafness. She focused on her tasks, folding linen, polishing silver, sweeping staircases with mechanical precision, yet her thoughts, traitorous and wild, refused to obey. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the Duke, his eyes dark as winter skies, his voice low and commanding. She had never been so humiliated or so strangely aware of herself. It was madness, she told herself. A servant should not feel, and yet she did. Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne, meanwhile, was a man at war with his own composure. The Duke's morning routine had always been one of order and silence. He breakfasted alone, read his correspondence, and rode out across the moors before luncheon. Discipline, distance, control. These had been his armor for years, but ever since that morning, his mind had betrayed him, with vivid recollections of soft curls, startled eyes, and a voice trembling between apology and defiance. He had been angry, of course, furious even, yet beneath the indignation had been something else, something dangerously close to fascination. He tried to dismiss it. "She is a servant," he told himself for the 100th time, "a distraction unworthy of thought." And yet when his valet asked whether the new maid should be transferred elsewhere, Nathaniel found himself replying quite sharply, "No, she will remain." Why, he could not have said. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps it was the spark of rebellion within him, the one that had never quite died, even after years of duty and loss. Later that week, the household prepared for the arrival of Lady Beatrice Montrose, Nathaniel's cousin and a frequent guest at the estate. Her visits were both a comfort and a torment. Beatrice was charming, beautiful, and far too perceptive for his liking. "Ah, Nathaniel," she exclaimed upon arriving, sweeping into the drawing room in a rustle of silk. "Still brooding, I see. One would think you had taken a vow of melancholy." "I prefer quiet to empty chatter," he said dryly. Beatrice laughed. "Nonsense. What you need is company. Preferably that of a suitable young lady. The season is nearly upon us, and the ton is already whispering about your prolonged bachelorhood. I have no intention of satisfying their curiosity." She arched a brow. "Nor your mother's?" He ignored the jab and turned to the window. The gardens shimmered under the midday sun, and, in the distance, he caught sight of a figure, a young woman carrying a basket of linens her bonnet pale against the greenery. Something tightened in his chest. "Who is that?" Beatrice asked, following his gaze. "No one," he said too quickly. "Ah." Her smile deepened. "Then why do you look at no one, as though she's carrying your peace of mind in that basket?" Nathaniel shot her a look. "You are incorrigible. "And you are transparent," she replied lightly, but there was a knowing glint in her eyes that unsettled him. Down in the servants' quarters, preparations for Lady Beatrice's visit were relentless. Clara worked from dawn to dusk, polishing silverware until her arms ached and arranging flowers until the scent made her dizzy. Mrs. Blackwell oversaw every detail with military precision. The Duke expects nothing less than perfection. His cousin is of the highest breeding. You will keep silent and invisible, as all good maids do. "Yes, ma'am," Clara murmured. But invisibility was not so easily achieved. That evening, as she carried a tray of tea into the drawing room, she found the Duke and Lady Beatrice seated by the fire, their laughter filling the air like music. Nathaniel's expression softened in his cousin's presence, a rare warmth that made him seem younger, almost boyish. For a fleeting moment, Clara saw the man behind the title, weary, lonely, human. Then Beatrice noticed her. "Oh, Nathaniel," she said with a teasing lilt, "you've taken on new staff, haven't you? How delightful. What's your name, girl?" Clara bowed her head. "Clara, my lady. Clara," Beatrice repeated thoughtfully. "Pretty name. Do you know, you have the air of someone who once stood above stairs rather than below them." Clara's hands tightened on the tray. "I was raised differently, my lady, but circumstances change." Beatrice's eyes gleamed with interest. "Indeed they do." Nathaniel cleared his throat. "That will be all, Clara." She nodded quickly and turned to leave, but as she did, she felt his gaze follow her, not with displeasure, but with something unspoken and unguarded. That night, Clara lay awake in the narrow bed she shared with two other maids. The candle burned low, throwing restless shadows on the wall. She should have been grateful merely to keep her position, yet her mind spun with confusion. Why had the Duke spared her after her blunder? Why did his eyes linger when they met hers, not cruelly, but searchingly, as though he wished to understand her? She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat quicken. "Fool," she whispered to herself. "You are nothing to him, nothing." But even as she said it, her heart disagreed. The next morning brought another storm, this time not from the skies, but from the Duke himself. Nathaniel had discovered a series of misplaced documents, letters concerning estate business that had vanished from his study. His temper, usually restrained, ignited. "Carelessness," he barked at his steward. "Do you employ fools or thieves in this household?" Mrs. Blackwell, pale and trembling, gathered the servants in the great hall. "Until the matter is resolved," she announced, "no one is to leave the premises. The Duke demands order." Clara stood among the others, heart pounding. The Duke entered moments later, his expression thunderous. His gaze swept over the assembled staff and stopped on her. "Miss Whitmore," he said sharply, "you were assigned to the library 2 days ago, were you not?" "Yes, Your Grace." "And did you handle any of the documents on the desk?" "No, sir. Only the dusting cloth and—" "Then how?" he said, taking a step closer. "Did a set of correspondence vanish the same morning you were there?" A murmur rippled through the room. Clara's throat constricted. "I swear, Your Grace, I touched nothing of value." His eyes hardened. "Do you expect me to believe that?" Something inside her snapped. not out of defiance, but desperation. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling yet clear, "because it's the truth. You may be a duke, but even you must know that a maid's honor is all she has left." A stunned silence fell. No one spoke to him that way. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he turned away. "Very well," he said at last. "If you are innocent, the truth will bear it out. Mrs. Blackwell, the matter is closed. For now." He left the hall, his cloak sweeping behind him. The servants stared. Elsie rushed to Clara's side, whispering urgently, "He could have dismissed you. Why would you?" "I won't let him think me a liar," Clara said quietly, though her hands still shook. Later, as she scrubbed the floors in silence, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting Mrs. Blackwell. But it was him. The Duke stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "You are either very brave," he said softly, "or very foolish. Perhaps both, Your Grace." He stepped closer. "Few speak to me as you did. Perhaps few have cause." A flicker of amusement touched his mouth. "You misunderstand me, Miss Whitmore. I find I do not mind it." She looked up, startled. "You don't?" "No." His gaze held hers. "In truth, I find honesty rather refreshing." He moved past her then, as if the conversation had been of no consequence, yet she knew it had been everything. That evening, as thunder rumbled distantly over the moors, Nathaniel paced his study. He should have been furious at her insolence. He should have dismissed her outright, but her words haunted him. "You may be a duke, but even you must know that a maid's honor is all she has left." He had seen truth in her eyes, fierce, unyielding truth. For the first time in years he felt something stir that was not grief or duty, but respect, and something warmer still. He poured a glass of brandy and stared into the fire. "Whitmore," he murmured under his breath, "who are you really?" Clara, meanwhile, lingered in the quiet of the linen room, folding sheets that no longer required folding. She could not forget the look in his eyes when he had spared her again. Not pity, not disdain, but something deeper. The Duke was a man bound by pride, yet when he had spoken to her, his voice had softened, as though he too warred against something he could not name. And so it began, the dangerous dance between them, not of words but of glances, fleeting and forbidden. She would catch him watching her in the garden, or find some small task suddenly assigned in whatever room he occupied. Each encounter left her heart more unsteady, her thoughts more tangled. He was her master, her undoing, and, though she did not yet know it, her destiny. Chapter 3. Secrets Beneath the Silver Moon. By dusk the sky had darkened to a bruised violet, and the wind rose in great howling gusts that rattled the windows of Hawthorne Hall. The rain began soon after, hammering against the glass with furious insistence, as though the heavens themselves had chosen that night to test the estate's endurance. Inside, the servants moved swiftly, shuttering windows, lighting extra candles, and laying fresh logs upon the hearths. The great house felt smaller when the wind roared through the chimneys, the sound a ghostly moan in the corridors. Clara had always loved storms once. As a girl, she had watched them from her bedroom window at Briarfield House, counting seconds between lightning and thunder, certain that no storm could truly touch her world of lace curtains and safety. But now, as thunder cracked over the moors, she shivered. Safety was long gone. She worked late that evening, checking every fire in the guest rooms to ensure no flame would gutter out. By the time she reached the west corridor, the one she had promised herself to avoid. The lamps were flickering low, and the air was thick with the scent of rain seeping through the walls. She hesitated. Then, before she could turn back, a deep voice spoke behind her. "You again!" She whirled around and nearly dropped her candle. Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne stood there, half-shadowed by the storm's light. His white shirt was open at the throat, his dark hair slightly dishevelled from the wind. In his hand, he held a book bound in black leather. "Your Grace," she said, her voice unsteady. I was told to ensure the fires were still burning." "Yes." His tone softened. "Mrs. Blackwell runs a tight household." She lowered her eyes. "I'll be out of your way presently." But he didn't move. Instead, he stepped nearer, studying her as though trying to read the truth behind her composed face. "You're not afraid of storms," he said quietly. "Most of the staff are." Clara glanced toward the window, where lightning flashed silver against the panes. "No, Your Grace. I used to think them rather beautiful." "Used to?" She smiled faintly, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Beauty seems a luxury for those who are not trying to keep a roof from leaking." He looked at her for a long moment. "You speak as someone who has known comfort and lost it." Her breath caught. She hadn't meant to reveal that. I shouldn't speak so freely," she murmured. "You should," he said. "It's refreshing." His voice had a gravity that pulled at her. She could feel the air thicken, as if the storm outside had found its echo within these walls. Her candle flickered, throwing wavering light across his face. Strong lines softened by exhaustion, a sadness she did not yet understand. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. Clara set down the candle and reached for the iron poker. "You shouldn't be here, Your Grace," she said, trying to steady her hands. "The servants will talk." "They already do," he said with a dry smile. "Let them." She turned sharply toward him. "You may afford scandal. I cannot." He paused, then inclined his head, as though acknowledging the truth in her words. "Forgive me. You're right." The wind howled outside, shaking the shutters. For a moment neither spoke. Then Nathaniel's voice, quieter now, broke the silence. "I wasn't always this cold," he said, almost to himself. Clara froze. "Your Grace?" He stared into the flames. "There was a time when I laughed, when the world seemed a simpler thing. That was before Spain, before the war took my brother and left me with a title I never wanted." Her heart clenched. She had heard whispers of it from the servants. The younger brother who had fallen at Salamanca, the Duke's withdrawal from society ever since. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Loss leaves marks we cannot see." His gaze lifted to hers. "You speak from knowledge." The words pierced her. The storm outside gave another violent crash, and suddenly it was all too much. The thunder, the memories, the way his eyes seemed to look straight through her. She turned away, pressing a hand to her chest. "My father ruined us," she said before she could stop herself. "He gambled away our fortune, even our name. My mother died in shame, and I took service where I could. There was no other choice." When she looked up, Nathaniel was watching her with quiet astonishment. "You were a lady." "I was a fool," she said bitterly. "A lady only until the money ran out." A long silence followed. Then, slowly, he crossed the space between them. "Clara," he said, "not Miss Whitmore, not Maid, but Clara. I would give a great deal to forget my title for one night, to be only a man, and not the sum of other people's expectations." The sound of her name in his voice was like the brush of velvet over skin. She dared not breathe. "You shouldn't say such things, Your Grace," she whispered. "Someone might misunderstand." "Let them," he said again, but softer now, as if speaking more to himself than to her. Lightning flashed through the window, and the room glowed silver for an instant. Two figures standing too close, their shadows stretching long across the floor. Clara stepped back, her pulse unsteady. "I should return to the servants' wing." He did not stop her, but as she turned to go, his voice followed her, low, earnest, and impossibly gentle. "Clara, I am glad you are here." The words struck her like a touch. She fled before her heart could betray her. The next day dawned pale and cold. The storm had passed, leaving the grounds glittering with rainwater. The air smelled of wet stone and fresh beginnings. But inside Clara's chest, there was only confusion. She moved through her chores in a daze, hearing his voice again and again. "I am glad you are here." Had he meant it, or was it merely politeness, a passing remark from a man who would forget her by supper? "Clara?" Elsie's voice snapped her from her thoughts. "You've been polishing that candlestick for half an hour." Clara started. "Oh, forgive me." Elsie eyed her curiously. "You've been different lately. Dreaming, maybe." "I hardly have time to dream," Clara said, forcing a laugh, but she couldn't fool her friend. "Just be careful," Elsie said quietly. "Men like him, they look down from high places, and women like us break on the fall." Clara's throat tightened. "I know." That evening the Duke did not appear for dinner. Lady Beatrice, however, noticed everything. She cornered Nathaniel in his study later that night, her eyes bright with mischief and concern. "Your temper seems oddly subdued," she remarked. "Usually a storm like last night would have you pacing the halls." "I found other company," he said without thinking. Beatrice's brow arched. "Indeed?" He regretted the words instantly. "The staff," he amended. "I spoke with one of the maids about the fireplaces." "Ah," she said, smiling faintly. "And did the state of the fireplaces inspire such distraction? You've been staring into space since morning." He gave her a warning look. "Beatrice?" "Oh, don't glower at me like some Greek statue," she said lightly. "You've always held the world at arm's length, cousin. It would do you good to let someone in, even if she comes from the servants' hall." He stiffened. "You presume too much." "I always do," she said, unbothered. "And I'm rarely wrong." With that, she swept from the room, leaving him in silence and unease. The following night was calm, clear, and moonlit. The air outside shimmered silver over the wet lawns. Unable to sleep, Clara slipped into the gardens after the household had gone quiet. She needed air, space, anything to clear her thoughts. The moon hung high, casting the hedges in pale light. Somewhere in the stables, a horse stamped softly. The world felt suspended between sleep and waking. She didn't hear him until he was beside her. "You shouldn't wander alone at night," the Duke said softly. She turned, startled. "Your Grace, I only wished for a moment of quiet." "As did I," he said. They stood side by side, neither quite daring to look at the other. The moonlight made everything unreal. His profile carved in silver, her breath visible in the cold. "It's beautiful," she said at last. "The moonlight makes even ruins seem whole." "You speak like a poet." "My mother read poetry aloud," she said wistfully. She said it reminded her that beauty survives even in sorrow. Nathaniel's gaze softened. Your mother was wise? She was kind, Clara whispered. And kindness is not always the same as wisdom. He turned to her then fully. You are wrong, he said quietly. It is the wiser of the two. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then, drawn by something neither of them could resist, he reached out hesitantly and brushed a damp curl from her cheek. Clara froze. The touch was barely there, yet it felt as though the world had stopped spinning. His fingers lingered, then fell away. I've overstepped, he murmured. Forgive me, she swallowed hard. You are my employer, Your Grace. You owe me no apology. Perhaps not, he said, voice low, but I find myself giving it nonetheless. The silence that followed was heavy, intimate. The moon shone between them like a witness. Finally, Clara found her voice. We are from different worlds. Whatever kindness you mean, it cannot lead anywhere good. Nathaniel's expression shifted, pain flickering behind control. I know. Then he turned away, his figure dissolving into shadow. Clara stood alone in the moonlight, trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of what had almost happened, and from the knowledge that whatever this was, this dangerous, impossible tenderness, it had already begun to change them both. Chapter 4. The Masquerade Ball. His Grace intends to host a masquerade, Mrs. Blackwell declared, her voice clipped and commanding. Every silver goblet must shine, every chandelier must blaze, and not a speck of dust shall be seen in the ballroom. You will all work as though the Queen herself were expected. A murmur rippled through the maids. A masquerade? After years of the Duke refusing any grand event? It was unheard of. Clara felt her heart skip. She had not seen him since. That night in the moonlit garden, their paths had crossed only in glances, a passing moment in the corridor, the flicker of his gaze during dinner service. Nothing had been said, and yet every silence between them had been full. Now there would be a ball, masks, laughter, light, a night made for secrets. She worked harder than ever that week, polishing glass until her hands ached. The house seemed to hum with energy. Tailors and florists came and went. Musicians rehearsed in the grand hall, and Lady Beatrice oversaw everything with unrestrained delight. Oh, you cannot imagine, Clara, Beatrice exclaimed one morning as Clara arranged fresh lilies near the drawing-room window. The guests, the gowns, the gossip. London will be whispering for weeks once word spreads that the Duke of Hawthorne is entertaining again. Clara smiled faintly. It will be a grand night, my lady. It must be, Beatrice said. Then, after a pause, she added with a mischievous glint, and perhaps not entirely for society's sake, I think my cousin has begun to awaken from his long, self-imposed slumber. Clara froze. You mean? But Beatrice only smiled knowingly. Ah, but that's not for me to say. The night of the ball arrived draped in starlight. Hawthorne Hall glowed like a jewel, every window ablaze, every marble stair gleaming beneath the light of 100 candles. The gardens shimmered with lanterns, the air scented with roses and rain. From the servants' gallery, Clara could see the carriages arriving, plumed horses, embroidered gowns, jewels glittering like fire. The orchestra began to play, and laughter filled the halls. She had no reason to linger, and yet she did. She watched as Lord Nathaniel appeared at the top of the grand staircase. He wore a black mask that covered half his face, a deep midnight coat that set off his broad shoulders. There was something commanding in his stillness, something that drew every gaze toward him, and yet his eyes when she caught sight of them, were distant, searching. Clara turned away quickly, her pulse hammered. She had no right to look at him. Not tonight, not ever. "Clara!" Elsie hissed beside her. "You'll be caught." Mrs. Blackwell said no one below stairs is to linger once the guests arrive. "I know," Clara whispered. "I'm going." But she couldn't help one last glance, and that glance changed everything, because standing across the ballroom was a woman in scarlet silk, tall, elegant, beautiful, her hand resting lightly on the Duke's arm. The guests were whispering her name, Lady Eleanor Marchmont, a widow of wealth and notorious charm. She smiled at Nathaniel as though she had already won him. Something sharp twisted in Clara's chest. It was absurd, she told herself. What did she expect? That a duke would look twice at a maid who once walked into his bath? That he would remember the trembling hand that brushed his cheek in moonlight? Foolish girl! She turned away, forcing her eyes down, and fled back to the shadows of the corridor. Hours later, when the ballroom had reached its glittering height, Clara found herself near the servants' entrance to the terrace, where trays of champagne were being passed between the staff. The air beyond the doors was cool, and faint music drifted from inside. She stepped out for a moment of breath, and nearly collided with Lady Beatrice. "Oh, Clara!" Beatrice exclaimed. "What are you doing out here?" I was sent for air, my lady," Clara stammered. "Good. You look as though you need it. It's dreadful inside. Everyone pretending they're not bored senseless. And poor Nathaniel, he's trapped by Lady Marchmont, who is determined to marry him. Honestly, I might have to intervene before he does something noble and foolish." Clara's heart lurched. He does not seem fond of her?" "Fond?" Beatrice laughed softly. "He'd rather be interrogated by Parliament, but society expects its dukes to marry, and Lady Marchmont is nothing if not convenient." Clara looked away. "I see." Beatrice tilted her head, studying her. "Clara," she said quietly, "you care for him. My lady, don't deny it. I've eyes, and so has he. You think yourself hidden, but you both wear your hearts in your silences." Clara's throat tightened. "It cannot be," she whispered. "He is a duke. I am nothing." Beatrice's expression softened. "You are not nothing, but yes, you are right. The world would not forgive such a match." Then, after a moment, she smiled wistfully. "Still, the heart rarely asks permission." Before Clara could reply, a voice echoed from the doorway. "Lady Beatrice, your brother seeks you." "Ah, duty calls?" Beatrice sighed. "Stay a moment longer, Clara. The stars are kind tonight." And with that, she vanished inside. Clara remained by the balustrade, the cool air brushing her face. Below her, the gardens shimmered silver beneath the moon. She could almost imagine herself far away, free of her uniform, her fear, her longing. Then she heard footsteps. She turned. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, still masked, his expression unreadable. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I did not mean to startle you." "You did not, Your Grace," she said, though her heart was pounding wildly. "I was just returning." "Stay," he said, and his tone, low, certain, stopped her. She hesitated. The music drifted softly from within, a waltz full of melancholy and desire. "You should be inside," she said. "Your guests will miss you." "Let them," he murmured. "They tire me with their empty laughter and false smiles. Out here, at least, I can breathe." He removed his mask, revealing eyes darkened by thought and by something else she dared not name. "You look exhausted," she said softly. "Perhaps you should rest." He smiled, faintly. I cannot rest, not when my thoughts refuse to obey me. Her pulse quickened. And what do your thoughts say, Your Grace? He stepped closer. That ever since you walked through that door, that morning, I have not known peace. Her breath caught. You mustn't. Clara, he said, and the sound of her name in his voice silenced her protest. Do you think I haven't tried to forget? I have. I have told myself 100 times that you are beneath my station, that this, whatever it is, cannot be. And yet here I stand. She shook her head, trembling. You cannot mean this. Can I not? He said softly. Then why do I seek you in every room? Why do I hear your voice in every silence? The moonlight caught his face, silvering the lines of pain and longing. He looked almost haunted and utterly human. Clara's heart warred with her reason. She wanted to run, and she wanted to step closer, to touch him as she had that night in the firelight. But she could not forget what Beatrice had said. The world would not forgive such a match. You will ruin yourself, she whispered. Perhaps, he said, but you will ruin me more if you walk away. Her eyes burned. You cannot ask this of me. I ask nothing, he said simply. I only tell you the truth. The music inside swelled. For a moment they stood on the edge of something vast, a choice that could not be unmade. Then a voice called from within. Your Grace! Lady Marchmont awaits. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Of course she does. He looked back at Clara, and for a fleeting instant she saw the man beneath the title, fierce, lonely, and utterly lost. Good night, Clara, he said quietly. Good night, Your Grace. He turned and disappeared into the light of the ballroom, his black coat vanishing into the glitter and gold. Clara stood alone, her heart in her throat, the echo of music drifting like smoke around her. When she finally returned to her narrow bed that night, she lay awake until dawn, the memory of his voice whispering through her thoughts like a confession. The following morning, the hallways of Hawthorne Hall were a battlefield of wilted flowers and empty glasses. The servants moved like ghosts, clearing away the remnants of splendor. Mind you, Clara, Elsie said as they gathered linens, I've never seen the Duke dance before, but last night he did, with Lady Marchmont no less. Clara forced a smile. I suppose it was expected. Aye, and Mrs. Blackwell says there'll be an announcement soon. An engagement, maybe. Elsie sighed. A fine lady like her will make a grand duchess. Clara's hands trembled on the tablecloth she was folding. I'm sure she will. But as she spoke the words, something inside her quietly broke. That evening, a letter arrived at the estate. Nathaniel read it in silence by the fire, his face hardening with each line. When at last he rose, the paper trembled slightly in his hand. The letter bore the seal of Lady Marchmont. She had written to inform him, with delicate cruelty, that she would not pursue their understanding further, having learned that the Duke had developed a most peculiar attachment to a member of his staff. She signed it with affection and regret. Nathaniel stared at the words until the ink blurred. Then he folded the letter once, set it into the flames, and watched it burn. The next morning, Clara was summoned to the library. Her steps faltered at the door. Nathaniel stood by the window, the sunlight casting long lines across the floor. He did not turn as she entered. You sent for me, Your Grace? He was silent for a moment, then said, Did you know Lady Marchmont has withdrawn her attentions? No, Your Grace. Apparently, he said, his tone bitter. The walls of this house have ears. She heard of our conversation last night." Clara went pale. "Then I have brought you disgrace. You have brought me truth," he said quietly. "And that, Miss Whitmore, I can live with." She stared at him. "What will you do?" "What I should have done long ago," he said. "Stop pretending. I am bound by the expectations of ghosts." He turned to face her then, his eyes dark with something fierce, almost defiant. "If I am to live under this roof, I will live honestly. No more masquerades." And in that moment Clara realized the mask had not been the one he wore at the ball. It had been the one he wore every day, the one of control, of duty, of distance. She curtsied. "Then I wish your grace strength in that endeavor." "Clara," he said softly, "I would wish for you beside me." She looked up, and for a moment the world held its breath. Then she shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You cannot ask me to stay," she whispered. "The scandal would destroy you." "I survived war," he said. "I will survive society." She turned toward the door. "But I would not survive the shame." And with that she fled before he could speak again. That night Hawthorne Hall was silent. The candles guttered low. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Nathaniel stood alone in his study, staring into the darkness, and wondering how a single mistake, a single bath, a single glance could undo an entire lifetime of restraint. He did not yet know it, but the next dawn would bring something that would change everything once more, something that would drive him to the very edge of his own heart. Chapter 5, Shadows of Exile. It was brief, written in Mrs. Blackwell's precise slanted hand, and delivered by a footman who did not meet Clara's eyes. By order of His Grace, the Duke of Hawthorne, Miss Clara Whitmore is to be relieved of service, effective immediately. A carriage will be arranged to convey her to Fairlea Manor, where Lady Montrose requires additional staff. Payment for the current month will be provided. That was all. No explanation, no farewell. The ink blurred. As Clara's eyes filled with tears she could not allow herself to shed. She folded the letter carefully, set it on the small chest beside her bed, and stood very still in the grey half-light. It was over. By sunrise, she was gone from Hawthorne Hall. The journey to Fairlea Manor was long and cold. The coach rattled through miles of moorland and mist, each turn of the wheels carrying her farther from the life she had known and the man she could not forget. Rain streaked the windows. Inside, Clara sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap, her mind haunted by fragments. The warmth of firelight on his face, the softness in his voice when he had spoken her name, the terrible, impossible wish that had grown between them. She told herself it was for the best, that she had no place in his world. That dismissal was mercy, not punishment, and yet every thought was a wound. When the carriage finally drew up before Fairlea Manor, the sky was the colour of pewter, and the air smelled faintly of the sea. The estate was smaller than Hawthorne Hall, but dignified, its stone walls draped in ivy, its windows glowing faintly against the gloom. Mrs. Hargrove, the housekeeper, met her at the door with brisk efficiency. "You're the new maid from Hawthorne?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Clara said softly. "Good. We've had no end of trouble keeping help. Lady Montrose is particular but fair, so long as you keep your head down." Clara nodded. "I'll do my best." "See that you do. Supper's at 7. The maids' quarters are at the back. You'll share with Molly." And that was that. Within minutes, Clara was back in motion, unpacking, scrubbing, folding, serving. The days became an endless rhythm of quiet labor. But at night, when the corridors slept, her heart wandered elsewhere. At Hawthorne Hall, the aftermath was swift and merciless. By the next afternoon, the entire county had heard whispers of the incident. No one knew the full truth, of course. Servants' tongues exaggerated what the gentry preferred to imagine, but the tale was enough to stain reputations and send invitations mysteriously unaddressed. Lady Beatrice stormed into Nathaniel's study the moment she heard. "You dismissed her?" she demanded. Nathaniel did not look up from the document on his desk. "I had no choice." "No choice?" she repeated. "You sent away the only person who's made you human again." He rose abruptly. "You think I wanted this? That I find joy in cowardice?" Beatrice faltered. "Then why?" He turned toward the window, the grey light carving hard shadows across his face. "Because I am not free, Beatrice. You forget what it means to be a Hawthorne. The title is not a privilege. It is a chain. Every move I make is watched, measured, judged. And you would rather please ghosts than follow your heart?" His expression darkened. "My heart is the one thing I am forbidden to follow." For a long moment Beatrice said nothing. Then quietly she whispered, "You are becoming your father." The words struck like a blow. He looked up sharply, but she was already gone, the echo of her steps fading down the hall. That night the Duke sat alone in his study, a decanter of brandy untouched beside him. The fire burned low, shadows flickering over the shelves. He had tried to write to her. 3 times he had put pen to paper, "Clara, forgive me." And 3 times he had torn the page before it was finished. What words could undo what he had done? What comfort could a letter bring to a heart he had exiled? He closed his eyes and saw her as she had been, standing beneath the silver moon, trembling but defiant, her voice soft and sure. "You will ruin yourself." Perhaps she had been right. Outside, the rain began again. He poured a glass of brandy and did not drink it. Weeks passed. At Fairley Manor, Clara's life settled into quiet obscurity. The estate overlooked the cliffs, where the wind carried the cries of gulls and the sea thundered endlessly below. She found solace in small things: the smell of baking bread, the softness of dawn light through the attic window, the rare kindness in Lady Montrose's tired eyes. And yet in every silence she heard him. She tried to write once, a letter that began, "Your Grace, please forget me," but the ink blurred with tears before she could finish. She burned it in the hearth and watched the words curl into ash. Sometimes she dreamed of Hawthorne Hall, the echo of its corridors, the warmth of its library, the sound of his voice saying her name like a vow. In those dreams, he always turned toward her, and she always woke before he could speak. Winter came early that year. Snow fell over the moors, softening the world into silence. At Hawthorne Hall, preparations for the season's gatherings went on, but the house felt hollow. Servants whispered that their master rarely left his study now, that his temper had turned cold, his laughter gone. Nathaniel attended dinners in London, signed documents, gave speeches in Parliament, but his thoughts remained miles away. His mother's old friends congratulated him on his composure. They mistook weariness for poise. At night, he returned to his townhouse and stared at the empty fire. He had everything society valued: wealth, title, power, and none of it mattered. One evening, Beatrice visited him in London. He looked older, she thought, though only months had passed. "Have you heard from her?" she asked softly. "No. Would you like to?" He hesitated. I would destroy her peace if I tried. Peace? Beatrice smiled sadly. Is that what you call the ache that's been hollowing you out? He said nothing. The truth was too heavy to speak. When she left, she pressed a folded paper into his hand. If ever you change your mind, she said, this is where she is. He stared at it long after she was gone. Then he set it in the drawer of his desk, unopened, untouched, and poured another glass of brandy. At Fairley Manor, Christmas came quietly. The household was modest. A few neighbours, a small tree, simple decorations. Clara helped polish the silver, trimmed the candles, and carried in trays of cider. When the others retired, she slipped outside into the crisp night. The sky was clear, stars strewn across it like frost. The sea below roared in steady rhythm, endless and patient. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer she could not name. If he ever thinks of me, let it not bring him pain. The wind caught her hair, tugging it loose from its pins. Somewhere far away, she thought she heard the faint echo of music, a waltz she would never dance again. By spring, both of them had changed. Nathaniel had begun to travel, first to London, then to Edinburgh, then across the Channel to France, where political matters required his attention. Yet every grand hall, every meeting, every carriage ride only deepened his restlessness. He saw her in every stranger's kindness, in every quiet woman by a window. One afternoon in Paris, he stood on the Pont Neuf, watching the river glint beneath the sun. He reached into his coat and found a small keepsake he had carried unknowingly all along, a ribbon, pale blue, that had once tied the stack of letters she used for correspondence at Hawthorne Hall. He had found it in the library after her dismissal. He had meant to throw it away. He never had. He held it now, letting the wind lift it slightly from his palm. A simple ribbon, frayed at the ends, and yet it felt like the last fragment of his soul. Back in England, Clara received word of her father's death. He had died penniless in some lodging house near London, his debts finally outliving him. There was no inheritance, no apology, only a name scrawled in the parish records and a note from a solicitor confirming that Miss Whitmore was his only surviving kin. Clara sat by the window as the sun set, the paper trembling in her hands. She felt no tears, only emptiness. The door creaked softly. Lady Montrose entered, her expression gentle. "You have had news?" "Yes, my lady," Clara said quietly. "My father has passed." The older woman hesitated, then laid a hand on her shoulder. "I did not know him, but I think he must have had great courage to raise a daughter like you." Clara looked up, startled. "You are kind to say so." "Not kind, merely honest," Lady Montrose said. "There is strength in you, child. Do not waste it on regret." When she left, Clara gazed once more out the window. The sky burned red over the sea, and though she did not know why, she whispered his name into the wind, soft, reverent, aching. That same evening, miles away, Nathaniel sat in his London townhouse, reading by lamplight when a gust of wind blew the curtains inward. The flame flickered. He looked up suddenly, certain absurdly that he had heard her voice. He stood, crossed the window, and stared into the night. For the first time in months, he reached into the drawer where Beatrice's note lay waiting. He unfolded it slowly, his heart hammering. Fairley Manor, Devonshire coast. He stared at the words until they blurred. And in that moment, he knew he could no longer pretend that love was something one could bury. Love was a ghost that walked beside him, whispering her name with every heartbeat. But fate, as ever, would not yield easily. The next morning brought a letter sealed in black, a summons from his solicitor. His estates required his immediate attention. Rumors of financial misconduct among his stewards threatened scandal. He could not leave London, not yet. So he folded Beatrice's note once more, tucked it into his breast pocket, and swore to himself, "As soon as this is resolved, I will find her." He did not know that the delay would cost him dearly, nor that even now, miles away, Clara was standing on the same coast, staring toward the horizon and wondering if love could survive an ocean of silence. Weeks turned into months, spring softened into summer, the fields bloomed, the air warmed, and yet both of them lived as though under winter's shadow. At Hawthorne Hall, the servants whispered that their duke had changed, gentler now, quieter, a man haunted but kind. In Devonshire, Clara became beloved by her employers, her grace and diligence earning quiet respect, but neither was whole. Letters went unsent, words went unspoken, time moved forward, relentless, and love, that fragile, fierce thing, waited, patient as the tide. Chapter 6, The Reckoning and the Dawn. It began as a whisper through the wind, a soft, relentless knocking of rain against the tall windows. But by dusk, it grew into a tempest, hurling branches against the old stone walls, as if the heavens themselves demanded reckoning. Inside, the great estate stood dim and brooding, its corridors flickering with the golden light of candles struggling against the wind. Nathaniel Hawthorne stood by the drawing-room window, his reflection cast in glass and shadow. Months had passed since Clara Whitmore's dismissal, yet not a day went by that her absence did not hollow him out a little more. He had thought he could bury himself in his duties, managing the estate, attending Parliament in London, enduring the tedious company of noble women paraded before him like prized horses. But every time he turned his head, every time he caught the faintest scent of lavender, her image returned, the curve of her cheek, the fire in her voice, the way she had defied him even as tears trembled in her eyes. And now, as if summoned by longing and guilt alike, she had returned. He had not known she was back on the estate until an urgent knock came at his study door earlier that evening. A servant, pale and trembling, stammered that Miss Whitmore was below stairs, soaked to the bone, begging to see the Duke. That alone had sent a shock through his blood, but before he could descend, gunfire shattered the night. Now he waited, pistol in hand, heart hammering like a drum. As the doors burst open and chaos flooded the hall, the scene below had been confusion itself. Clara, her cloak dripping rain, had been struggling with two rough-looking men, smugglers by the look of them, faces half-covered, one clutching a pistol, the other dragging her toward the door. She fought like a wild cat, wrenching free, even as one struck her across the cheek. "Clara!" Nathaniel's voice tore through the room like thunder. The assailants turned. Too late. A shot rang out. The first man dropped. The second fled into the storm. Then there was only silence, broken by the gasping of the wind and the ragged sound of Clara's breath. Nathaniel dropped the pistol, crossing the marble floor in 3 strides. "Are you hurt?" His hands trembled as they cupped her face. Blood bloomed at the corner of her lip, mixing with the rain. He felt fury, fear, and something deeper, Relief so powerful, it was nearly pain. She shook her head faintly. "He followed me," she whispered. "Mr. Corbin, the steward of Lord Beckwith. He learned I once worked here. He said I carried secrets worth selling. I tried to warn you." Her voice faltered. He caught her before she fell. Later, much later, she awoke in the same bedchamber she had once tended. The fire burned low. The storm was waning. Her head throbbed, but she was alive. When her eyes opened, she saw him seated beside her, coat discarded, shirt sleeves rolled, his face drawn with exhaustion. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said softly, "You should not have risked yourself. You're a duke, not a soldier." He gave a weary laugh, the first she had heard in months. "Once, perhaps, but for you, Clara Whitmore, I would have faced an army." Her breath caught. She turned away, staring into the fire. "You should not say such things." "And why not?" His voice deepened. "Do you think exile cured me of what I feel? That distance could teach me indifference?" "You are bound by your world," she said quietly. "And I no longer belong to any." He rose, crossing the small space between them. "You belong here," he said, his tone low but fierce. "Do you think I could forget you? I tried. God knows I tried. I threw myself into every duty, every expectation, but nothing, not one speech in Parliament, not one dance, not one woman could make me forget the sound of your laughter or the way you looked at me that morning in the bathhouse." Clara's eyes shimmered. "That morning ruined us both." "No," he said, "it began us." She wanted to protest, to remind him of the gulf between them, of the titles and gossip, of how society would tear them apart. But when he took her hand, something in her heart yielded. He drew her to her feet, gently brushing his thumb along the faint bruise on her cheek. "You came back to warn me. You could have fled, yet you returned. I couldn't bear the thought of harm coming to you," she admitted. "Even after all that was said, all that was lost." He smiled, soft and aching. "Then let us lose the world together." The following morning dawned pale and clear, the storm spent. Word spread that the would-be assassin had been captured at the edge of the moor, but within the quiet walls of Hawthorne Hall, another kind of reckoning took place. Nathaniel summoned his solicitor and his mother, the Duchess, both of whom entered his study with cautious curiosity. Clara stood beside him, her hands folded, chin lifted in quiet dignity. The Duchess's eyes widened at the sight. "Nathaniel," she said sharply, "what is the meaning of this?" He met her gaze calmly. "Mother, you once told me that duty defines a man. I have come to disagree. Love does." The Duchess stiffened. This woman," he interrupted, "saved my life. She risked her own for mine. She is braver than half the lords who sit in Parliament and kinder than any woman I've ever known. If you cannot bless my choice, I shall marry her without it." The room went still. Even the solicitor looked away. Clara's lips parted in shock. "Marry?" she whispered. Nathaniel turned to her, eyes steady. "You once told me love was not enough to conquer society. Perhaps it isn't, but I am no longer afraid of their whispers. Let them talk, let them choke on it. I am done living by other men's rules." For a moment, the Duchess's face softened. She saw in her son's eyes something she had not seen since he was a boy. Peace, and for all her pride, she could not bring herself to destroy it. "You will be cast out of every drawing room in London," she said finally. "Then I shall build new ones." Nathaniel replied simply, "For us." The wedding took place quietly, in the small chapel near the edge of the estate. No titled guests, no carriages lined along the drive, only candlelight, the scent of rain, and the faint echo of birds returning to the moor. Clara wore no jewels, only a simple gown of cream muslin. Nathaniel took her hand, and when he spoke his vows, his voice trembled not with fear, but with awe. "I was a man of stone," he said, "until you taught me to feel again." When she answered, tears glistened like pearls on her lashes. "And I was lost," she whispered, "until I walked into your life by mistake." He smiled, remembering that morning, the scandal, the shock, the unguarded laughter that followed. It felt now like another lifetime, a foolish accident that had led them both home. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the morning light broke through the chapel windows, spilling gold across the floor. Outside, the moors lay washed clean by the storm. Inside, two souls, once divided by pride and circumstance, finally found their dawn. Chapter 7. A bath, drawn at dawn. The first light of dawn crept softly through the high windows of Hawthorne Hall, painting the marble floor in gold and rose. Beyond the great oak doors, the estate stirred, servants beginning their quiet routines, birds calling to one another across the dew-damp moor. But within the Duke's private chambers, time itself seemed to pause. The scent of lavender drifted through the steam that rose gently from the bath. Clara Hawthorne, once a maid, now Duchess of Hawthorne, sat upon the edge of the great marble tub, her hair falling in a loose cascade over her shoulders. She reached for a jug of warm water, pouring it with practiced grace, watching the ripples spread and shimmer in the light. Behind her, a low, amused voice broke the stillness. "You pour as though you're still in service, my love." She turned, smiling over her shoulder. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, barefoot, a robe loosely knotted at his waist. The years had changed him. The lines of command softened by peace, the sternness of his jaw tempered by laughter that came more easily now. Yet in his eyes burned the same steady fire that had once so unnerved her. The one that saw her, always, for who she was beneath station and circumstance. "Habit," she said, her tone teasing. "Old habits die hard." He crossed the room slowly, the faint sound of his steps echoing in the vaulted space. "You've not been a servant for 10 years, Clara. The Duchess of Hawthorne should not draw her husband's bath." She tilted her head, pretending to consider. "Perhaps not, but the maid in me remembers the morning she first walked through that door." He laughed, deep, genuine, the kind that reached his eyes. "Ah, yes, the day that nearly killed me from embarrassment. And me from mortification." She met his gaze, warmth flooding her expression. "Though I suppose it was worth it. Worth every scandalous second," he said, taking her hands and drawing her to her feet. "Who would have thought a single mistake could change the course of a lifetime?" For a moment they simply stood together, the quiet between them filled with the soft crackle of the fire, the whisper of water, and the hum of memory. The estate had seen many changes since that stormy night. Hawthorne Hall had been restored, its cold grandeur replaced with a gentler beauty. Roses in the courtyard, laughter in the halls, a library that smelled faintly of books and children's chalk. For their children, 2 boys and a girl with Clara's eyes, ran freely through the rooms, unburdened by the invisible chains of class that had once bound their parents. Clara glanced toward the window. "Do you remember?" she asked softly. How everyone said it would never last, that I'd be your scandal for a season. I remember, Nathaniel murmured, brushing his fingers along her jaw, and I remember telling them they underestimated us. Her eyes shone with affection. You risked everything. I gained everything, he corrected. She leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest. Sometimes, she whispered, I still dream of that night, the one when I returned, the rain, the gunfire. His arms tightened around her. Then remember what came after it, the morning light, the peace, the choice we made together. Clara nodded, exhaling slowly. I do. Later that morning, the children would burst into their chambers, demanding stories and breakfast. The day would unfold with laughter, arguments, lessons, and love. But for now, in the golden hush of dawn, there was only them. Nathaniel stepped into the bath, wincing at the warmth. You've made it hotter than the fires of hell, woman. Clara's laughter filled the chamber. Serves you right for teasing me. He held out his hand, water dripping from his fingers. Then come share my punishment. She raised a brow, feigning scandal. A duchess does not climb into her husband's bath uninvited. Then consider it an order, he said with a grin that had not lost its charm even after a decade. She sighed, shaking her head, but her smile betrayed her. You and your orders, she said as she stepped in, water swirling around them, her laughter mingling with his. And yet somehow I always find myself obeying. Only because, he said, drawing her close, you know I'd obey you in turn. Their lips met, gentle and familiar. Outside, the sun lifted higher over the moors, bathing the estate in light. Inside, the two souls who had once been divided by the world were whole again. Years later, visitors to Hawthorne Hall would often hear stories of the Duke and Duchess, how they had married for love, not duty, how their union had softened the heart of the most austere nobleman in the county, how the hall, once a place of pride and silence, had become a home filled with music, warmth, and laughter. But those who truly knew them, the old housekeeper, the loyal stable hands, the villagers who had watched their tale unfold, would smile knowingly when they spoke of the bath. For it was there, they would say, where everything began, a mistake, a scandal, a spark that refused to die. As the morning light spilled across the marble bath, Nathaniel brushed a strand of hair from Clara's face. Tell me again, he whispered, how it all started. She laughed, eyes gleaming. You truly don't remember? I remember, he said, voice low, but I like hearing it in your words. She traced her fingers along the edge of the tub, where water shimmered like glass. Once upon a time, she began, a foolish maid walked into a duke's bath by mistake, and nothing, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple, was ever the same again.